views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is the program where we talk to various journalists, find out what they're thinking about and what they're talking about, and maybe give you a little extra insight as to who they are and why they write about what they write about. Tonight it's a special edition. We're coming to you on Monday night because of the terrorist attack in Manhattan, so it gives us something even more compelling to talk about than we usually do. And we're going to start on the telephone right now. It is will be with Michael Benjamin, who is on the editorial board of the New York Post, of course, the former assemblyman here in the Bronx. Nice to have you with us, Michael.
Gary, got to be on board tonight.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to talk about, and you know, when we have something unfortunate, to put it mildly, to talk about, I guess it's real important. Let's just talk about this terrorist attack. I suppose not as serious as it could have been. A bungling terrorist, as it was, allegedly from Akayed Ullah from Brooklyn. Just in general, what are your thoughts about what happened very early this morning between Times Square and Grand Central?
Yeah, I think it was another close call for New York.
Excuse me, it wasn't time. It was between 7th and 8th Avenue in that runway between Times Square and 8th Avenue. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
That's correct, yeah. I think New York dodged another bullet, thankfully to the incompetence of this alleged terrorist or lone wolf or wannabe ISIS supporter. But just how many more times can we afford to be lucky?
Well, you know, it's a very difficult question to answer, and we've talked to police officials and criminal justice officials. These are very difficult things to protect on kind of the policing end. They have to be dealt with before it gets to that point. The people who provide materials, the people who provide information how to do it. I mean, you know, thank goodness this didn't turn out as terrible as it could have been. But, you know, again, it becomes very, very difficult to stop this sort of thing.
Well, it's only difficult because, the civil liberties lobby and others have gone to court against the NYPD's demographics unit, which was designed not to spy on Muslims, but to gather intelligence in places where potentially radicalized persons would be known and to try to get ahead of them. But because of this PC effort to not profile a community, courts have agreed with civil rights organizations and have not permitted and forced the NYPD to disband their demographics unit.
I did. Yeah, go ahead. You can finish, and then I'll give you a response.
I was going to say the police department was not looking to racially profile or religiously profile Muslims. They're looking for ways of finding radicalized persons and to prevent attacks on New York, like the one we witnessed today, where the bomb did explode because of the terrorists, the wannabes' incompetence. He only wound up injuring himself severely.
Right. You know, I did a rather lengthy interview with an imam from the Bronx during this period of time when that dialogue was going on about what should be done. And he was very clear that, and I think it's from a point of logic, he said very, very directly, we don't want people like this either, because of course it gives us and our peaceful faith a bad name and everything else. We would rather than be surveilled in that way, to have the NYPD work with us, work with the leaders of the community, and we will work with you to help weed out and sort out the people who really would be of concern. And so, you know, maybe it's a matter of tactics, but it's very easy to say, well, civil liberties, of course, are vital and important in the United States of America, but there may be a tactical way of handling this that engages a community as opposed to making them feel oppressed. That was his message to me. I can find you the tape, and that's what he said.
Yeah, and he's right. I mean, I had the opportunity to join members of the Muslim community down at FBI headquarters, where they had their community meeting to discuss with community leaders what the signs to look for in the community, what radicalization among young people and others, and opening lines of communications to do that. And the NYPD does something similar, but they also need the ability to also be on the ground in whatever communities to get proper information. They're not spying anyone. They're not looking to entrap anyone. They just need to gather the ability to gather information, and the courts should not be looking to handicap or hamstring legitimate intelligence gathering efforts
Yeah,
that are endorsed by many community leaders in that community.
Right.
I mean, we have my concern when the news reported that today's suspect is Bangladeshi. My concern, of course, is for Bangladeshi that are here in our borough and contributing and doing a great number of good things in our community, who themselves have been, attacked wrongly by others in the community. You had a young man last year who was assaulted by a couple of teenagers who kept referring to him as ISIS. Right. I mean, these sort of things can only further that, and it's something that the police are interested in stopping, as well as stopping terrorist attacks.
Well, of course, terrorist attacks of a different nature, racial attacks, are done by white Christians down in the South. We know what happened in Charlotte and all those other places.
But the Bangladeshi Muslims who was attacked in the Bronx was not attacked by skinheads.
No. I meant that. Yes.
And black young men.
Yeah, I meant that in a general way, that you could start, deciding this, that, or the other, but let's just change the dialogue slightly.
Yeah, but I want to add, though, when the FBI was seriously fighting racial discrimination and fighting terror by the Klan, they did infiltrate the Klan. They had paid informants within the Klan to get information to catch those individuals who were terrorizing and murdering African Americans. So it's a tactic that works, and the courts should continue to support.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about your thought on this. And it may not directly relate to this particular attack, but you could foresee that it would go for attacks further down the road. Although this allegedly, the gentleman who's suspected of doing this did say this is because of attacks in Gaza Strip, and he was concerned about in Israel. The president's rhetoric about and his plan to make, almost just came out and said it, let's make Jerusalem the capital. While many, I know, believe that it is a correct policy, they thought that maybe the way that he handled it was only going to further inflame people to these kinds of activities. Do you think that the president's statement about Jerusalem and overall rhetoric about keeping Muslims out of the country and those kinds of things influence the train of thought that leads to these kinds of events?
One, I can't be a personal supporter of the president. I don't think he's talked about.
Do you say you are or not a person?
I am not. I said I am not a personal supporter of the president.
Okay.
He has not talked about kicking Muslims out of the country per se. He's talked about banning travel of individuals without proper vetting from some Muslim and other countries that he has on a list of nations that are considered threats to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah,
his statement on Jerusalem is no different than what candidates have been promising for the last 25 to 30 years about moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. He's just actually put his campaign pledge to the test and actually actualized it. Over the weekend, I don't think we've seen the entire Middle East and Arab nations inflamed over what he has proposed. Yes, he's had a couple of incidents, but you haven't had what people have predicted, where you'd have the entire region, tearing down and attacking Americans, from Cairo to Damascus. That hasn't happened.
Yeah, well, listen, it's only a few days in. I mean, we certainly want to watch, how things go. Yes, obviously, this has been on the agenda of many presidents, but many presidents felt that it was better, rather than to come out and do it in the way that President Trump did it, but do it in a way that ultimately is a negotiated concept, and as not to offend or inflame people who have a predilection toward this kind of activity. Let me ask you about something else. The response from Sarah Huckabee today immediately was that this is why the president wants to end so-called chain migration, where relatives of people in this country would not be allowed to travel to this country. Do you like that idea?
I think they should stick to the written proposal where you have to vet everyone coming into the country, whether or not they are part of the family chain. Family chain is something recent. It was an effort to try to reunite families as well, and also create opportunities for people from underrepresented countries to be in the United States and have the opportunity to come here and live and thrive. When the young man was brought here 7 years ago, I don't think anyone had in mind that he was going to become radicalized in the United States.
Right.
And he was a 20-year-old when he came here. So obviously his radicalization happened here. Bangladesh, as you and I both and others know, is not a hotbed of Muslim radicalism. So we need to further determine how this young man became radicalized and why.
I lost what Michael was saying there. I don't know if people in the booth did, but I didn't hear the last part of what Michael was saying.
No, I was saying that obviously he came here 7 years ago as a 20-year-old who was not radicalized, and somehow over the last 7 years something happened to cause him to become radicalized and to become the alleged suspect in this case. We need to look at that. And I don't think the visa program that allowed him to come here as someone's brother is the problem. I think Americans want to be welcoming to immigrant families and keep them intact. I think the president initially talked about, proper vetting of individuals to make sure that we're not bringing people who are radicalized and want to do harm to the United States. I think there's nothing wrong with that, but to scrap an entire program, I think that's wrong. I think, Press Secretary Huckabee, was on the wrong track. Very little of what she has to say, I actually think makes much sense.
Okay, maybe we'll leave her at that. What about the idea that he built the explosive online? I don't know if there's a way that you can control what information is out there, but boy, that just makes you afraid that just about, frankly, any lunatic could come up with something.
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
That
Online?
he built the explosive based on instructions he got online from some website.
Yeah, but you could. Right. But you don't have to be on a website. In the old days, there were things called libraries and bookstores. You can pick up the materials in those places. I must confess, I have a couple of those U.S. Army manuals for improvised explosive devices. They've been freely sold on the open market for the last 25, 30 years.
So you're saying that that's not an avenue to worry about or a way to protect. I guess there's not much you can do.
It's not. And for years, teenagers have known how to build pipe bombs. It's been a problem among teens for a very long time. They're not very difficult devices to build.
Michael, one last thing, and I'm going to assume that you and I agree on this. NYPD and the response of the police, boy, these folks really know their stuff, and they're on the scene right away. I just am, when I look at footage and I see how they behave when it comes to these things, I guess we both have to tip our caps because, in this case, Commissioner O'Neill, they really know what they're doing.
No, they do, and we have to tip our hat to the officers who were first upon the scene, knowing there was an explosive device.
That's right.
There was an IED, and possibly there could have been a secondary device that he could have tripped once they were there. But they went and they did their job, and they're to be commended for their bravery and their dedication to service. The Port Authority is one of those places that we consider, I guess, hardened. You have state police, you have National Guard, you have city police, you have the MTA police, and you have the Port Authority police that are there.
Yeah.
They can't prevent everything. They don't have a post in the tunnel, although in the past I've seen officers on those scooters going back and forth along the tunnel. There wasn't anybody there this morning at that particular time, but it was all caught on videotape. And so we saw exactly what happened when his device went off. He could have, had it been a more powerful device, he could have killed 20, 30 people instantly.
Or more. I mean, who knows? Listen, Michael, we got to run. I know you and I have many other issues we said we'll talk about, but you can't get everything done. But your participation in this program and your willingness to be part of the dialogue for many years is much appreciated, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Gary. Take care.
You too, my friend. Okay, there he is, Michael Benjamin from the New York Post editorial board. We are going to take a break, and we'll be right back with more. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self. And I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz on this special edition because of the terrorist attack. We thought we'd get on a couple of days earlier and get right to it. Right now, I guess, where are we going? To Brooklyn? Is that where Jarret Murphy is, or are you in Manhattan at this time?
I'm in Manhattan.
All right, Jarret Murphy is the editor of City Limits. Nice to have you with us, Jarret.
Very nice to be here, Gary.
So let's talk about this terrorist attack. I was just talking with Michael Benjamin at the New York Post editorial board, and we were talking, among the many things, the difficulties of trying to prevent something like this. A lone wolf who has access to some sorts of explosive materials, builds the device based on information he got online, and then goes and tries to do something horrible. Your thoughts about the vulnerability of the city of New York in particular?
Yeah, I mean, this is something people have identified for a long time as a threat for the reasons you talked about. And, I think this attack today appears to have been more elaborate than some of the others. I mean, we've heard about people just, about Halloween, we were talking about someone, driving a truck down a bike lane.
Right.
You don't get much cruder than that. You don't need anything really to do that. And it's especially, I think, something that has attached itself to the rise of ISIS as our primary sort of foreign terrorist threat. There's a lot less apparent coordination there. It's really just kind of a brand that people pledge allegiance to. With Al-Qaeda, there was a sense, especially for the worst of all attacks on September 11th, certainly there was coordination, there was leadership and connections across borders and stuff. But now people can kind of just sort of sign up by doing an attack and then pledging allegiance. So it's very hard to disrupt. Although I'm sure the police have ways to try to root this out, and
right.
They're obviously they follow the purchase of materials that might be used in larger bombs. But the smaller you get, the harder it is to detect. And so the miracle today, if folks who may not know where exactly this took place, this is that weird tunnel between the Port Authority station and Times Square, where there's that weird poem that talks about someone being really tired, why bother, why the pain, just go home. It's that strange little tunnel, which is always packed in the morning. So it's incredible that the bomb misfunctioned, apparently. And so relatively few people apparently were not very seriously hurt.
Yeah, and often, I'd say they, but we are so closely packed together. One of the dialogues that just came up, and I'm curious about your interpretation or your impression of it, is, because I agreed with what you just said, that it's very hard on the back end when somebody's already got it to prevent it, because a lone wolf and these kinds of attacks can happen anywhere. So then I'd like to think there are things you can do ahead of time to prevent it, change people's minds, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that Michael Benjamin and I were talking about, he expressed frustration with the legislation that stopped the NYPD of investigating and surveilling, mosques and other Muslim groups, because he said, give them a chance to do what they can do very well, and that is have their ear to the ground. What's your thought on that? I mean, he was basically saying that's civil liberties to the extreme that actually hurt us in the long run.
I don't think there's any evidence that that's true. I mean, if you look at some of the material that came out from the quote-unquote demographics unit, they had surveilled every Arab Muslim restaurant in town. They'd spent public taxpayer dollars doing that. I don't know how useful that was. I think what this effort to infiltrate and surveil the mosque in the city did was really just chill a lot of cooperation by people who have no intention of ever harming anybody and who should be the police, their top allies. The police department, nothing bars them from following leads, from rooting things out. They've been permitted to do that for a very long time. I think to look at an attack like this, for the very reasons that you said, it's very hard to prevent. And the city has always been a place where people bomb things. Going back to the 1920s, people have been blowing stuff up in New York for one cause or another. And when it's just a single person, no level of surveillance is ever going to guarantee safety. All it's going to guarantee is that you end up putting a lot of innocent people under suspicion, and especially in a kind of case where you need cooperation from communities, that's probably the last thing that you want to do.
My point of view is that you want to engage people's cooperation and not make them feel oppressed. And I think some of the tactics that the courts had ruled against did make people feel oppressed. I'll express to you what I expressed to Michael. I did an interview with a Bronx imam, and he was very clear that if they would work with us, we're probably the last people that want to see somebody of who claims to be a Muslim do something wrong. So we would work like crazy to help you weed out potential terrorists, rather than us feel like you're watching over us and that people who are peace-loving and people who have no intent to do bad are being watched very closely. So I guess maybe we're on the same page about that.
It sounds like it. One thing struck me, Gary. I was on the train this morning when this happened, and word sort of slowly percolated about what was causing the delays. There was a brief ripple of interest in it. A couple of people said a couple crazy things, but for the most part, people went back to their newspapers or their nap, or I think if the goal is, and maybe when people find out the details, they'd be more concerned. Obviously, it is unsettling, but I think if the goal of attacks like this is to chill the city or to terrorize people or to make people think twice about going to see the lights at Christmas, the anecdotal evidence I saw today is that it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's not gonna
I think
work.
to some degree people have folded this into their expectations, and they know that when bad things happen, hopefully they have a plan. They know something about what to do if something like this occurs, and they trust the city to keep them informed about these events and give them some basic tools to survive. People are going to try to kill us in New York. That's been happening for a long time. They haven't been very successful recently, and I think that's sort of the attitude most New Yorkers have, is to kind of shrug it off, just like we shrug off so many things that people in other places might take umbrage at.
One of the things that I'm curious about your reaction to is the president's rhetoric, the bold announcement that we're going to make Jerusalem the capital of Israel, and the immigration policy that selected Muslim countries directly. Do you think that plays into the mind of somebody who has a predilection toward this kind of behavior?
Well, I think it does, but in fairness to the president, I think that people who have a predisposition to engage in an act like this are going to find objections to a long history of things that America has done, to a lot of stuff about our culture. People try to bomb the U.S. and cause harm to us during the Obama presidency, which was very, very different from Mr. Trump's in terms of both tone and policy. So I don't think I would lay this on the doorstep of Trump. I don't think it helps in terms of building larger goodwill in that area of the world, in that community. And I think in the end that might have some harm to us. But I don't think an individual like this can be blamed on Trump or Obama or anybody else. I think if you're going to strap a bomb to your chest and walk into a subway tunnel, chances are there's a long thread of U.S. policy and official rhetoric that you're going to take objection to.
Last question on this, and then I want to talk to you. We're going to totally change hats, but what about the notion of ending chain migration, so-called chain migration, where relatives of people who are here will not be allowed to come to this country? Do you think that is a proper preventative measure? It's actually what Sarah Huckabee said in a knee-jerk reaction to this event today.
I think that's the kind of people want to offer something. They want to give the public something. Here's what we're going to do to stop this. And I think that's a curious target. It strikes me that if people are here, you want families here. You want people to have a community. You don't want people who are lonely and disconnected. You live in the Bronx, Gary. You know that the vast majority of immigrant families are exactly in line with everything we think New York and America are. I think obviously you want to, scrutinize people who are coming to the country if they have ties to some known group. You won't be able to root at everybody. Some people will make decisions later in life to take up arms or do something silly in other ways. But I don't know that stopping that kind of migration is going to stop these attacks. And I don't know if it's a healthful thing if you think of immigrant communities and families. Unattached young men or children without parents or other situations that might occur with that kind of ban might be kind of the last thing we want to create.
Yeah, I personally am concerned about the tone, and every time something like that comes out, it sets the wrong tone, and I think it inflames passions and tensions. Switching hats totally, because City Limits has done just an unbelievable job with the zoning plans in the city of New York. Of course, we've got a big one going on here in the borough of the Bronx. Most recently approved by Community Board 4, approved by Community Board 5, approved by Community Board 7, and the borough president came out directly in favor of it. Every one of them with some kind of condition. Do you think this process and what the result will be is going to be able to keep just about everybody happy, or do you think there's a lot of frustration still to come?
There's bound to be frustration, I think. I think that people might get something of what they want. I think you have it's not a black and white thing. It's not a two-sided issue. You have the community boards, you have the council members who are involved, obviously the Bronx Borough President, and then you have groups like CASA and the Coalition for a Community Vision, who want some of the same things but want more of them, or want different things, or want them more. I think in the end there is going to be some disappointment around this plan. I think that's true of a lot of decisions governments make. The question is, whether this is not an ideological issue for groups like CASA and folks who are really concerned about displacement threats in this neighborhood. Some of them really see it, and I think legitimately so, as an existential issue for whether they can remain in the city. So it's not a question of sort of being satisfied with half measures. Can they be assured that there is going to be a real, genuine effort to protect those communities, and will it have some chance of being effective? I think the disappointment might be tempered if there's some sense that the city is serious about that.
Jarret, we're going to.
There's a tremendous amount of concern.
Right, we're going to run out of time. My response to that, and it's an open-ended thing, and I'm going to leave us both with it, is promises, promises. Let's wait and see how it plays out. We've all seen promises made at the filtration plant, at Yankee Stadium, all over the borough of the Bronx. Will those promises be kept? We will find out. Jarret Murphy from City Limits, always great to talk to you. On the air or off the air, you be well. Take care of your family, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Gary.
Great. Folks, that will wrap us up for the Bronx Buzz today. Thank you for joining us for this special edition. Hopefully the next special edition was because we have something great and wonderful as opposed to the terrorist attack that we had today. So we'll see you next time. Good night.